For the last year, I've embarked on a journey to learn how to kite hydrofoil. Being in Oklahoma, this has required some travel, thousands of crashes, and some much appreciated instruction along the way. Granted, much of the OK Kiteboarder channel has consisted of foiling episodes due to this focus. However, I have no interest in abandoning my first love of twin tip kiting, and I will continue to create content for the entry level and the intermediate OK Kiteboarder. This episode, similar to a past twin tip episode of Are You Progressing as a Kiter, is going to address progression checks for the developing kite hydrofoiler. This video will start with a baseline assumption that you are no longer riding the bull, that you can travel in each direction comfortably on a full-length setup, and that water starts in normal conditions are of no issue for you. But if you're already doing things like this episode is probably not beneficial. Okay, it's definitely not beneficial. This progression will mostly be filled with my current level of learning experience with the direction of skills that I am imminently approaching. So let's get started. Are you progressing as a foiler? 10 checks. Number 1, have you considered your gear progression? Now that you are cruising on what may be considered a starter setup, many other preferences are going to start coming into play. You're finding out that you're getting tired of traveling in one direction only to dip back into the water, to then flip the board and continue in the other direction with another water start. Investing in a performance hydrofoil setup can be expensive, but many of the starter setups are very heavy, they're difficult to turn in the water, and they can delay your development. This is the time to find a wing with great lift, a lighter setup with low to medium speed that's stable in all planes to start your progression into a foil with increased playfulness and ease with transitions on the water. I progressed to the 633 wing and it has served me well from my initial hover glide setup. Currently I'm riding the Delta Cozumel wing and I find it to be even friendlier than the Golden Standard 633. You also need to be using a board that still has enough flotation, that you can ride it on the water when needed and when performing surface transitions. There's a good chance that your current board will still suffice just fine with the higher performance foil below your feet. But as you develop into more advanced free riding or foil racing, then find a board that will fit those goals. But initially something that is still friendly on touchdowns and for water transitions. Try different setups during your progression with harnesses. I started by using a waist harness, which I just couldn't keep down on my waist no matter the design. It was because of that constant overhead pull. I found it somewhat uncomfortable, so I switched over to a seat harness, and almost immediately I found it to be more functional and comfortable for me. Next, I tried out a rope slider on my spreader bar, and I quickly found that it allowed me to ride on my toe side much more easily, and it placed my bar at more beneficial angles. Much of this is all personal preference, but don't get locked into thinking that there is only one harness setup and that all are the same. It may make a huge difference. As you develop as a foiler, you are going to be more perceptive to the way that your kite is reacting when trying to speed upwind, drift downwind, on turns, etc. Expose yourself to as many hydrofoil friendly kites as you can. In the last few months, I went through a process of initial exposure to foil kites, and I found that I really like them. I currently use a Fly Surfer Soul with most of my sessions, but they have their drawbacks as well. Any chance you get to try other friendly foiling kites, do. The more exposure, the better. Of course, things like budget, location, conditions, riding goals, all these come into play, but make sure that you have a kite that you can grow with on a hydrofoil. Make sure that you have a basic understanding of your foil setup. If you're using a track system below your board, know how placement of the foil will affect your foot pressure, as well as how foot strap positioning and adjustments can affect distribution of weight. You don't want one leg overloaded with pressure when riding the foil. Become familiar with these adjustments on your setup. If you know many foilers, you also know that they love customization. So entering the world of custom bars, shackles, bungees, nose strap, one strap, two straps, hooks, etc. is a world you could never fully exhaust at this stage. Just don't become overwhelmed. Now let's get on to the water. Number 2, are you increasing your angles and playfulness on the foil? One of the great things about hydrofoiling is not only your ability to ride in light conditions, but also your increased angles of riding upwind and downwind. You may notice early on that you are having difficulty getting downwind, which is the exact opposite issue you had early on when riding a twin tip. Start working more on top of your board with increased toe pressure to drift more downwind. Early on, this can be very intimidating as it feels that you're about to go over the front of your board and create foil face. Start getting more comfortable in small increments and mix this with then dispersing heel pressure and opening your shoulders and hips to then drive the foil upwind. Then work on quick pressure changes through your feet, creating an S-curve above the water. Following your kite downwind with increased toe and ball pressure through your feet is going to set up the foundation for the heel to toe side transition in the future. Number 3, are you utilizing momentum on starts in light wind? You're still in the water with each transition and you're riding in light winds often. As the board gets more comfortable under your feet, use it as a tool on the light wind start. You don't have to down loop the kite on the start in light winds. You may want to as you progress, but here you can aggressively fly the kite overhead and then dive it into the power zone while slightly getting on foil beneath your feet. Then when recognizing that there is not enough power, bring the kite back up and down again for another dive while still partially on foil, limiting the resistance out of the water and giving you a successful light wind start. It almost becomes like a dance between your kite above and the foil under your feet. Number 4, are you developing a water jive transition with Footswitch? Are you ready to practice a foot change in jive? Use the board on the surface of the water to practice. Use front foot pressure to lower the board to the surface, and then bring the kite overhead to reduce weight. Then bring your back foot forward and replace your front foot to the back, keeping your center of gravity as constant as possible. Don't be overly concerned with kite movement early on to come out of this transition. After switching your feet, you can then slowly sit back into the water, but you won't have to flip your board before another water start in the opposite direction. As this gets more comfortable, then start working on kite control to send it to the opposite side, but don't be too aggressive. Too quick across the window and you'll get jerked off of your board. You can also practice the footwork for this on a unidirectional board for practice without a foil. I prefer switching before the transition and others prefer to switch following the transition. I was able to work on the footwork before I was ever close to any transition because of the early foot switch. If you prefer to switch following the transition, then I would definitely add it after the next check instead of before. Number 5, can you transition on air from heel to toe? This was a move that did not come as naturally for me. I actually performed it successfully only after performing air jives with foot switches, because then I was riding for long distances on my toe side before transitioning. However, without a foot change, it is difficult to ride long distances on your toe side without transitioning from heel to toe. And the toe side water start is not what I would classify as an entry-level skill. The closest feel you will get to this movement is with riding as much downwind as possible, as stated earlier. Don't get aggressive with your kite flying and follow the kite downwind on your toe side before cutting it back upwind on your toe side to complete the transition. Number 6, are you jibing with Footswitch? The air jibe transition with the Footswitch was honestly my initial goal for the year. It was a move that I had encountered hundreds of crashes on, but also one that was completely gear dependent for me to finally accomplish. It required for me a front wing that was stable, that had a lot of lift, but not excessive amounts, and with great pitch control. The basic principle created in the water jibe carried over to this maneuver. Through that process, I created an air jibe transition video, and you can find the link here. This transition is actually what I was most proud of for my foiling goals. Unfortunately though, humility hits hard when it comes to the tack, and a little bit on that later. Number 7, are you redirecting the kite efficiently? Foil control is one thing, and kite steering and transitions is a whole other, but they have to work in concert. Many times I would find myself making the transition and staying on foil, but then waiting for the kite to then catch me on the other side of the window and then bracing for that pull, or down looping the kite and coming out of that loop with uncontrollable speeds. An efficient redirection of the kite is timing and position. What I am learning is that if I'm not going to down loop the kite due to having sufficient wind, then I will go slightly upwind before redirection and fly the kite a little deeper in the window, and then I will follow it around the corner. When the kite goes high overhead without a down loop is when the kite is required to catch me on the redirection. When down looping the kite on transition, I try to keep the kite high before pulling to loop it, and then heading just slightly downwind, but with tension still on the lines. I would appreciate comments below on what you have discovered in kite redirection with tube and foil kites on foil. Number 8, how's the tack coming along? This is going to be my nemesis. I have at this point attempted maybe 30 unsuccessful tacks. The good thing is that the crashes are way less severe than on the Jive. You just sink back into the water as the board slips out from under you. The bad news is that at this point this level seems unattainable. But this progression list is applicable for me as well, and I hope to do an instructional on the tack in the future once I've conquered it. But until then, I just can't check this one. Number 9, jumping yet? I believe I'm at the point that I should be jumping, but I would argue you could even put this much earlier in the checklist. But I ride without a back strap, I have a narrow stance, I'm short, and I will require a custom foot strap position before beginning this venture, unless I learn how to ride with a wider stance. When jumping, make sure to use a smaller wing than the large free ride wing that you are practicing air transitions on. You want less surface area for a wing upon re-entry into the water. Also, I would recommend wearing a helmet if you don't already when you're practicing your jumps. No explanation required here. I have a good source of instruction for this in Oklahoma City on Lake Hefner, and maybe I can get Daniel to do a quick instructional on the full jump in the near future as well. Number 10, have you implemented a smaller wing? Okay, now that you have conquered most of the checklist, start implementing a smaller, faster wing. Something that will hold up better in higher wind conditions, that has more dig, but is not as friendly with lift and pitch control and requires more speed with your air transitions. So, does it feel like you're starting all over again? Well, maybe temporarily, but progression and challenges in this sport are endless. This concludes my non-comprehensive Are You Progressing as a Foiler episode. This is for the entry-level foiler, and I hope in the future that I can progress to the level to make an intermediate version. If you have any gear needs, reach out to Green Hat Kiteboarding, subscribe to this channel for future content, and also comment below about your opinions, experiences, etc. in relation to your progression as a foiler. We'll see you next time on the OK Kiteboarding.